Good morning. Today's Daf is Daf Lamed Tet. We are
Can
at
we
the
de can we dedicate this to the my mother's yahrzeit today to her neshama today? Dedicate the learning.
absolutely, absolutely happy to dedicate this to your mom's neshama. Please share her name.
Elisheva Devora Bat Yechiel Boaz.
Elisheva Dvorah Bas Yechiel Boaz. Her neshama should have an aliyah, and our learning will be bizchuta. Okay, so we are at the third line, end of the third line on Lamed Tet Amud Aleph, and uh, the Gemara is discussing the Mishnah, our Mishnah that we learned at the end of the day yesterday on the bottom, near the bottom of Lamed Chet Amabet, where a Jew slaughters an animal for somebody who's not Jewish. And the question is it kosher? So, if obviously the Jew's doing it with the right intention, the right mindset, but the question is it kosher? So, and Rabbi Eliezer says it's not kosher because um, uh, the concern is that the we're dealing with a non-Jewish owner of the animal, and our concern is that the non-Jewish owner of the animal will have an intent for idolatry, and therefore the even though the shechita was fine, the entire meat of the animal is not going to be kosher. And uh, uh, Rabbi Yossi, on some level, agrees with the Tanakama, saying that in fact it's kosher, but provides a basis specifically explaining that that in fact the intention of the owner does not matter. All that matters is the intention of the person who is performing it. And so we then saw in the Gemara two explanations of how these three opinions in our Mishnah, the Tanakama, Rabbi Eliezer, and Rabbi Yossi, can all coincide. Can fit together because at the one hand, it seems like Rabbi Yossi and the Tanakama are saying very similar things because they're both saying that the shechita is permitted, and so we had two explanations of that. The first explanation, just to go through it, to give us a little bit of chazar and help me remember as well. So the first explanation assumed that the we didn't know what the non-Jew was thinking, and the question is do we assume that what the non-Jew is thinking is idolatry or not? And that's the debate between the first two opinions. But we would, if we knew that it was idolatry, then everybody would agree that it's not kosher. And the third opinion says even if it was idolatry, it doesn't matter because the intention of another person, who's not the person who's doing the slaughter, doesn't matter and won't affect the kashrus. That was approach number one. Approach number two assumed that we knew that in fact the non-Jew was had an idolatrous intent. And the point is that when do we say that an idolatrous intent of the owner is what can make a difference? That's only in the Beis Hamikdash. But outside the Beis Hamikdash, we would not make that comment. So that's and so as a result, whereas the Rabbi Eliezer says no, even outside the Beis Hamikdash, we'll make that approach. And of course, again, Rabbi Yossi would say, as we've mentioned already twice, that Rabbi Yossi says it doesn't make a difference what the person who owns it says, even inside the Beis Hamikdash, because we don't care about. All we care about is the thoughts of the person who's doing the service. So again, we're now at the end of the third line on Lamed Tet Amud Aleph, and the Gemara says, "Itmar hashochet is a behema lizrok damal la'avodas kochavim." What if the person who's slaughtering it is thinking, I'm doing a good slaughter, but I'm going to throw this blood that is going to result for an idol. Now, throwing blood for an idol is idolatry. And the question, though, is at the moment he hasn't thrown the blood. So, do we say that the thoughts about one issue, one aspect of doing the service, can then we are going to interpret it as if you did the other parts of the service with that intent or no. So that was question number one. So the point is if you slaughtered an animal with the intent to throw the blood for idolatry, or to burn the fat for idolatry. Again, your thoughts during the slaughtering with respect to the slaughter itself are fine and dandy, meaning you don't have any specific thoughts necessarily with that. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Psula. Rabbi Yochanan says it's puzzle, and Rashi explains. If we take a look at Rashi, 3, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, because this is Psula is a more of a language of sacrifice. So Psula, Asura Behana. It is considered usher to benefit from it because this is considered this animal, even though the service that you did was not the service, not the idolatrous service itself. You just thought about doing an idolatrous service while you were doing the shechita. It's going to be prohibited to benefit from. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Amar Muteris. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says no, that's not the way the halacha works. Halacha doesn't follow what your intentions are. You have to do the action for it to be a problem. Now, Tosos here points out that actually Rish Lakish would agree that in fact this person is chayav misa because they still had. It's as if they did the idolatry. But in any event, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish would say it's everything's the animal itself is kosher. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Psula Machashvin Ma'avoda V'Alfin Chutz Mipnim. Rabbi Yochanan says, I'll tell you why that we know that you can have one thought that you can think about another service while you're doing the first service, and that service can and that thought can thereby create a problem with the entire service. It's because that is true for pigul. Namely, that when you think the whole idea of pigul is when you're doing one service, you're thinking about doing another service at the wrong time. And so that's what pigul is by definition, because pigul isn't doing the thing wrong, it's thinking about doing something in the future wrong. And so just as pigul works and causes the animal to be sacrificed to be invalid, and there's a prohibition to consume that animal, so too, Yalfin and Chutz Mipnim, we're going to apply the same rule in a non-sacrificial setting. Namely, if somebody were to slaughter an animal for Chullin purposes, meaning namely to eat outside the Beis Hamikdash, if you have that thought about idolatry, of doing an idolatrous service with respect to another step of the animal, of the processing of the animal, that in and of itself is going to be a problem. It's the animal will be prohibited to benefit from, and the shechita will be considered effectively invalid.
How far is this I'm a little confused. How far is the thinking going? Is he thinking about the non-Jew that would do the idolatry service, or is he himself thinking that this is I'm gonna join with the non-Jew to help him do his idolatrous service?
So right now, this is a statement of the Jew doing the idolatrous.
No, but he's doing this for the non-Jew, right? He's checking.
No. This is a new case. This is a new case. This is not the case that we were talking about in our Mishnah. This is a different case. Okay, this is a case where the Jew is doing the slaughtering. There may not even be a non-Jew involved. Okay, now it's going to obviously there's a connection to our Mishnah, and we will get to that connection. But right now we're dealing with the Jew doing everything, and of course hasn't done it. He's just thinking about doing it. So and Reish Lakish Amar Muteris. Reish Lakish says no. It is the animal is permitted. Not that you're allowed to do this thinking, but the animal itself is not going to be prohibited because ein machashvin miyob me'avoda ve'avoda lo we don't go from one service to another, even outside the context of pigul and v'lo gamrin and chutz mipnim, and we don't derive the laws of outside the Beis Hamikdash from the laws inside the Beis Hamikdash. And they both go according to the reasoning, meaning both Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish follow their reasoning in another machlokas that we are about to quote. The Idmar, shchata lishma, if you think that you're going to slaughter an animal with the right intention, and Rashi points out that we're talking about obviously a chatas animal, because if it was any other kind of animal, we would not say, we as we've seen both in Menachos and in Zvachim that if you slaughter an animal not for the right sake, unless it's a chatas or a Pesach on Pesach, on Erev Pesach, then that is not going to invalidate the sacrifice. So that's why we're going to say that we're talking actually about a chatas offering. So again, let's see if I can find that Rashi. Shchata lishma. It is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, about 22 lines down in the narrow lines of Rashi. Shchatalishma, bechatas Myri, we're talking about a sin offering. The kol shar zvachim ksherim shalolishman, because every other kind of sacrifice is basically kosher if you don't have the right intention. Aval chatas shenishchata shalolishma psula, except for a chatas became Pesach, and similarly a carbon Pesach shenishchat shalolishma. Im shachad, and similarly a carbon Pesach, and again we mean it on Pesach. If you sacrifice a carbon Pesach not on Pesach shalol lishma, well then it becomes a shlamim. V'im shachad achatas lishma lizrok dama shalol lishma. And so now what we're dealing with is back into the Gemara, right? So we're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 11 lines in. So shkata lishma lizrok dama shelo lishma. So you're thinking what you're got the right sacrifice in mind when you're doing the slaughtering, that you know you're slaughtering a chatas. But your plan is that you're going to throw the blood as if it were an olah. So Rabbi Yochanan Amar Psula. Rabbi Yochanan says no. That already it's the invalid sacrifice. You haven't even done anything. You haven't done anything wrong yet. But that thinking is going to be sufficient. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Amar Ksheira. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says no. It's kosher. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Psula. Rabbi Yochanan says it's puzzle. Machashvin me'avoda la'avoda v'gamrina me'machshavas pigel. We learn about. You can think about one service while performing another service, and that thought will matter. V'gamrina me'machshavas pigel, and we learn it out from pigel, which is exactly that. You're doing one service, for example, slaughtering the animal, with a thought to eat it at the wrong time. So that is your thought is about a different service. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Amar Ksheira. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says no, it's totally valid. You're not the sacrifice is not going to have a problem because ein machashvim me'avoda lavoda. We don't in general think about one service to another. Why don't we think about one service to another? Because the lo gamrina mimachshavas pigel, because we don't learn the other laws of sacrifices from the laws of pigel. And so we now have the same machlokas, two different situations. One in a situation of Chullin, where you're slaughtering an animal and your intention is to engage in idolatry in another step in the preparation of the animal, namely throwing the blood or burning the fats. And we have this in the context of shalol lishma, that where you think about where when you're doing the slaughtering of the animal, you're thinking about doing another service, shalol lishma. And so the question that the Gemara asks implicitly is, why do we need to have both machlokot? So utricha, we actually need them to have them both. Di'it marbaha, because if we only had the machlokas in the first case, in a situation where one is doing a chulin sacrifice, a chulin animal, and is going to plan to eat the animal, and they're thinking about doing idolatry with respect to the blood or the fats. So Bahaka Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, maybe it's only in that situation that Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish would hold his position, Mishum dechutz mipnim lo yalfin, because we don't learn about non-sacrifices from sacrifices. Aval pnim mipnim, but ema modi leila Rabbi Yochanan. Maybe Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, Reish Lakish, would agree with Rabbi Yochanan that when it comes to other kinds of sacrifices, we'll learn from pigel. Just like Piggle, you can have a thought with respect to some future step when you're doing the slaughtering. So too, with respect to having the wrong intention with respect to which animal, which kind of sacrifice it is. You can have the wrong intention with respect to a future step, even when you're doing a step completely correctly itself. Ve'it marbahach. And if I were to just tell you the machlokes with respect to the failure to do the right intention, Bahahi kama Rabbi Yochanan. Maybe that's the only case where Rabbi Yochanan will learn from Pigel, because that's a case of learning from one sacrifice situation, namely Pigel, to another sacrifice situation, namely doing it in the wrong, having the wrong intent with respect to the nature of the sacrifice. Aval Baha, but when it comes to the case of Chullin, when it comes to the case of idolatrous intent with respect to a regular animal, Ema Modi Leila Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. Maybe he would agree with Rabbi Shimon Lakish that we don't learn from Panim to Chutz. We don't learn from other kinds of non-sacrificial animals to we don't learn from sacrificial animals to non-sacrificial animals. So tzricha. So that's why we need to have both. So Masav Rav Sheshes. Rav Sheshes says, 1 second. I'm going to quote to you our Mishnah, and our Mishnah seems to disagree with both Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. Because what did our Mishnah say? Amar Rabbi Yossi, Kal v'chomer hadvarim. We have a Kal v'chomer uma b'makom machshava posels b'mukdashin eina kol holich ela achar ha'oved. We say that when it comes to the service in the Beis Hamikdash, everything follows only the one who's doing the service and not the owner. Makom she'ein machshava poselas b'chulin. When it comes to a situation where the thoughts are not supposed to be able to invalidate the animal, how Eino din shelo yehei hakol holich ela akar hashochet? Well, then certainly we should follow just the person who's doing the slaughter and not the person who owns it. Now, how does this disagree with both Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish? So we'll see. So my ein machshava poselas b'chulin. So what does it mean that a machshava cannot invalidate a chulin animal? Ilema delo pasla b'klal. You're going to tell me that whatever I think about the animal that I'm slaughtering cannot possibly invalidate it at all? We know that that can't be what it's saying, because that's not true. How would we ever find a case where the person doing the slaughtering is intending to slaughter the animal for idolatry? That's everybody agrees that that's going to be a problem. So it can't be that when Rabbi Yossi says that that intent can't invalidate a non-sacrificial animal, that can't be what he's talking about. Ela pshita me'avoda la'avoda. It must be that the person is thinking about from one service to another service. Kamar. And here's the situation. Uma b'makom shemachshava poselas b'mukdashin me'avoda la'avoda. Now, when it comes to sacrifices in the Beis Hamikdash, there is a situation where you can think about one service while doing another service, and that thought about some future service can invalidate, namely, that's what Pigel's all about. Ein hakol holich, but yet, ein hakol holich ela achar ha'oved, but everything depends on the thinking of the person who's doing the sacrifice, not the owner of the sacrifice. Makom she'ein machshava poselas. So in a situation where thought can't invalidate b'chulin, when it comes to unconsecrated animals, me'avoda la'avoda, there is no Pigel analogy for a regular animal. So ela ba'ota avoda. The only way you can have a problem is if you have a bad thought, namely an idolatrous thought, about the service that you're doing. So eino din shelo yehei kol holich ela achar hashochet. Well, then certainly it should all follow just the person who's slaughtering. And so this Rabbi Yossi's statement distinguishes between consecrated animals, sacrifices, and unconsecrated animals. So namely, that when you have a consecrated animal, you can have a bad thought that goes from one service to another service, and you can be thinking about a different service while you're doing this service, and that is going to be a problem. Whereas when it comes to unconsecrated animals, it's not going to go from one service to another. But that doesn't fit with both Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, because Reish Lakish. So let's take a look and see. Continuing on in the Gemara, we are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines up. Panim kasha l'Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. When it comes to things that are inside, namely sacrifices, that's going to be problem according to Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, because Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish said both with respect to sacrifices and with respect to non-sacrifices, we're not going to invalidate one service through a thought about another service. And chutz kasha l'Rabbi Yochanan. And outside the Beis Hamikdash, that's a problem for Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Yochanan says both inside the Beis Hamikdash and outside the Beis Hamikdash, you can have a thought about one service while you're doing another service, and that can create a problem. So as a result, this position of Rabbi Yossi in our Mishnah is inconsistent with Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. So Bishlam Panim Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish lo kasha, we can resolve the question with respect to Reish Lakish. Hamikame dishma mi Rabbi Yochanan. Maybe he changed his mind after hearing Rabbi Yochanan's viewpoint. Halavasar dishma mi Rabbi Yochanan. Right, one is before he heard Rabbi Yochanan's viewpoint, and then it was after, meaning that after hearing Rabbi Yochanan's viewpoint, so then he realized that actually that at least with respect to inside the Beis Hamikdash, he would hold that in fact you can have that if you have a thought about a later service. For example, if you think that you're going to do the throwing of the blood for the wrong kind of sacrifice, you think that you're going to do it for an ola, even though it is a chatas, and you're thinking that while you're doing the slaughtering, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish changed his mind and agrees with Rabbi Yochanan that that's going to be puzzle. But elachutz, but when it comes to outside the Beis Hamikdash, namely where outside the Beis Hamikdash you think that you're going to throw blood for idolatry or burn fat for idolatry while you're doing the slaughtering, so you haven't yet done the action, but you're thinking about a future moment. Elachutz kasha Rabbi Yochanan, but that doesn't work for Rabbi Yochanan. He had already heard Reish Lakish's viewpoint, and so as a result, it's clear that he's not going to retract. So hu mosivla v'hu mefarikla. So Rav Sheshes, who asked this question, posed it and answered it. Ba'arba avodos. No, there are 4 moments of service that Rabbi Yossi is referring to. V'haki kamar, and here's what he's saying: Uma b'makom shemachshava poselis b'mukdashin ba'arba avodos. That there are 4 moments of service when you can have a bad thought, and that will invalidate the sacrifice. Ein hakol holech ela achar ha'ovid. Well, we only focus on the one who's doing the service, as we now turn to Lamed Tet Amud Bet. Makom she'ein machshava poselis b'chulin ela b'shtei avodos. But when it comes to chulin, where there are only 2 relevant services, as Rashi tells us, chulin, top Rashi on Lamed Tet Amud Bet, le'inyan avodos kochavim, when it comes to idolatry and this animal, she'ein machshava poselis, your thought will not invalidate and cause this animal to be prohibited to benefit from, behen, ba'arba avodos. It's not 4 services. There's not, again, the 4 services are the receiving of the blood. Second. The 4 services are
You get the shchita,
the shechita, the slaughter.
kibul, the holech, and the
Yeah, yeah,
three.
yeah. The slaughter. I just wanted to make sure that slaughter was counted. The slaughter, the receiving of the blood, the taking of the blood to the altar, and the putting of the blood on the altar. So those are the four. But when it comes to avodah zara, there are not four. Ela bishnayim, bishchita ubizrika, just the slaughtering and the throwing. So as a result, that's what that. So given the fact that there are fewer with respect to a chulin animal as opposed to a consecrated animal, a sacrifice, a kodesh animal. So eino din shelo yehe hakol holech ella achar hashochet. So then certainly we should focus just on the one who's doing the slaughtering, not on the actual owner. And so that is why in our Mishnah, Rabbi Yossi says that we're not going to worry about the non-Jewish owner of this animal. We're going to allow you to eat this. It's going to be a kosher shechita because we're going to assume because the your thoughts are kosher and that therefore it's a kosher animal.
But and it's chulin. That's not a sacrificial animal. So then one can shecht it anywhere and then eat it, right?
Yes, but we're dealing with the concern is that the owner in our Mishnah, right? The owner in our Mishnah situation, we're worried that maybe, or maybe even we know that he had an idolatrous thought, and the question is that idolatrous thought by the owner sufficient to create a problem and invalidate the shechita? So again, earlier positions in our Mishnah said yes, but the Rebbe Yossi says no. And so as a result, that the question is why not? Why doesn't it? And according to Rebbe Yossi, the reason that it does not create a problem is because the owner's thoughts don't matter in both in respect to sacrifices and with respect to chulin animals as well.
And is the owner in this case a Jew or non-Jew?
Well, in the Mishnah case, it's a non-Jew. That's specifically what our Mishnah said.
Okay, so if it's a non-Jew, he gives it to a Jew
To prepare the meat. He gives it to his kosher
cut it up
butcher.
for him, to butcher it, whatever it is. And it's not really it's not a sacrificial, but he shechs it. The Jew said he's an employee. The non-Jew pays him. What does he care what the non-Jew is going to do with it afterwards?
Well, because the non-Jew has offered the Jew to be able to keep the meat as payment,
Oh, really?
well, that can be one example where it matters whether the point is that now or the non-Jew has authorized the Jew to sell the meat for him. Can the Jew sell it? Can the Jew who slaughtered it sell it to a kosher person? That's precisely the question that we're asking is this animal, even though it was owned by a non-Jew, and we may need to worry that the non-Jew had idolatrous thoughts with respect to the animal. Maybe he says, I'm going to, give you keep the animal. I'm just give me the blood and the fat, which are not even kosher for the Jew and the chalev, and not even kosher for a Jew anyway. So and the Jew does the Jew need to be worried that the non-Jew is going to take that chalev and blood and give it to an idol, and will that cause the entire animal to be invalid? That's precisely what our mission is all about.
But how is the Jew going to know what the thoughts of the non-Jew are? He just says, "Here's the animal. Cut the animal
Well,
up."
again, remember there are two different understandings of our Mishnah. One understanding is that we say that a stam thoughts of a non-Jew are presumed to be idolatrous, or we actually know that they're idolatrous. But either way, we're dealing with a situation where, on some level, we know that we need to be worried about this. And so that's why we have the machlokas. Now, the third opinion that we just are quoting from our Mishnah just now of Rabbi Yossi doesn't worry about it because he says, I don't care what the owner thinks. He can think
Exactly. That's what I'm
right,
saying.
but I understand. So you agree with Rabbi Yossi, but that's not all the opinions in our Mishnah. So if you're saying that that's what Rabbi Yossi says, so then sure, absolutely, you're absolutely right. That's exactly what Rabbi Yossi says. So Tanya Gavase de Rabbi Yochanan. So we're on the third line of Lamater and Bet, and we say we've got a brisa that teaches like Rabbi Yochanan. Because what does that brisa say? Hashochet, this is a behemoth, Lizrok Damala, Avodas Kochavim, that if in fact you slaughter an animal, and your intention is to throw blood for idolatry, or to burn its fat for idolatry. That is considered sacrifices of the dead, and so as a result, we see that according to Rabbi Yochanan, there is that like Rabbi Yochanan said that when a Jew does slaughters an animal, even if they have thoughts about and the animal is non-sacrificial, even though even in that non-sacrificial setting, if the Jew thinks about doing a later service with the animal that's for idolatry, that is enough to invalidate the animal at that moment of slaughter, at the moment of shchita. But if he slaughters the animal and only later figures out that he's going to do the throwing of the blood, Zehaya Maisa Bikisri, that was something that unfortunately happened in Caesarea. The lo amruba lo iser velo heter. And the rabbi said it's a suffix, it's not clear. We're not going to prohibit it and we're not going to permit it. So and so that is the situation. So now
Say pigo only applies to sacrificial animals, kodshim.
yeah, pickle only applies. Absolutely, pickle only
There's
applies.
no pigo concept by Chullin then.
That is correct. There is no pickle concept by Chullin. That is correct. Well, I mean, that two things. One is that is on some level the machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish says there's absolutely no pickle concept by Chullin whatsoever, whereas Rabbi Yochanan says, well, although the pigel itself doesn't apply, pigel is limited to sacrifices, the same kind of situation can apply. Namely, even though you're thinking about doing a future service with respect to this animal at the moment you're doing shchita, that it can invalidate the animal at this moment. Just as pigel will invalidate the animal at the moment you have the thought, so too, this animal will also be effectively invalidated and caused to be now you're not going to be allowed to benefit from it because of the thought that you have about idolatry at the time that you're doing the slaughtering. Even though the slaughtering itself you're not doing for idolatry. Again, that's the key element in this discussion. So why?
But there's no chi of karet in this case, right? Even according to
correct. Everybody. Well, there's a potential chi of misa in a court of law if in fact the person was warned about the idolatry, not having idolatrous thoughts. Because then the person has on some level engaged in idolatry. And so as a result, that could be, it could be that the person gets killed. So in some ways, it's even more strict than kares. It's a more chamor punishment. But the bottom line is that you're absolutely right that the concept of pigel and the kares associated with eating it, that would not apply. That would not here. It's prohibited to benefit from, but I'm not sure what the punishment is for eating a idolatrous, eating something that was worshipped as an idol. Okay, so now the question is, why in this brisa that we just cited do we say that the rabbis did not permit or prohibit this story in Caesarea where the intention to throw the blood or burn the fats for idolatry happened after the slaughtering? So position number one, Amar Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda explains, Lo amru ba iser mishum kuvodan derabanan. No, they didn't want to say it was prohibited out of respect of the Tanakama in our Mishnah, because the Tanakama in our Mishnah says that the intent of an idolater is not automatically assumed to be for idolatry. And so, as a result, they did not want to say that it's going to be prohibited. And lo heter, and they didn't want to say it's permitted, mishum kvodu the Rabbi Eliezer. And they didn't want to say it's permitted because Rabbi Eliezer says that we do assume that the intent of the idolater is for idolatry. Or that's one way to read this. I guess we could also read it as the point is that even when you know that the person is thinking about it, the Tanakhama says we don't learn from the Beis Hamikdash to outside the Beis Hamikdash, and Rabbi Eliezer says we do learn from the Beis Hamikdash to outside the Beis Hamikdash, and so as a result, the thought at the wrong time could be sufficient to cause a problem. And so, again, out of respect to those two other opinions in our Mishnah, the rabbis in the situation in Kisari did not want to say it was permitted or prohibited. Mimai, but 1 second, what is that based on? Dilma adkan loka amri rabbanan hasam el delo shamana dechashiv. Maybe it's a situation based on our first understanding that we don't know that he had an idolatrous thought. But here we do know that he had an idolatrous intent. It just happened after the shechita. Hochiach sofo al tchilaso. Do we say that the person's idolatrous intent later tells us about the shechita that happened earlier? Inami ad kan lo kam Rabbi Eliezer hasam elagabi ovid kochavim. Or alternatively, when Rabbi Eliezer made his statement with respect to focusing on the intent and saying that the intent is going to be problematic and thereby cause the shchita to be invalid, that's because we were talking about an animal that was owned by a non-Jew. Because an idolater's general intent is for idolatry. Aval Yisrael hochiach sofo al tchilaso lo amrinan. But we're not going to say that just because it turned out that he was having in mind to do idolatry later, that we're going to say that that was his intention from the beginning, and therefore the animal would be invalid, but we won't necessarily say that. So because in both directions we could come up with an explanation as to why maybe either the Tanakhama or Rabbi Eliezer would not go so far to the case of where the Jew does the slaughtering and only later intends to do the idolatry. So as a result, we don't know whether we're going to be permissive like the Tanakhama or prohibitive like Rabbi Eliezer. So that's explanation number one.
So what is it? If we don't permit it, you don't.
Well, it ends up being
disallow it.
we end up being stricter as a result. And so now we have. I'm sorry. This was intended to be a question on Rav Chisda's explanation. And so the bottom line is we can't. So this is a question on Rav Chisda's explanation because how do you know? Rav Chisda said his explanation was based on the respect for the Tanakhama and for Rabbi Eliezer, but it turns out that we don't know that in fact either the Tanakhama or Rabbi Eliezer would hold on to their positions. So that's not a great explanation. So Ella Amr Rav Shizvi. So Rav Shizvi offers an alternative explanation. Lo Amru be heter mishum kvodo de Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. No, it's out of respect of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel that we ended up saying that we're not going to either be permissive or prohibitive explicitly with respect to this. And again, because it's a suffix, nobody's able to eat it, but it's still not going to. But we're not going to be explicit about whether it's prohibited or permitted. It's going to be a suffix and therefore prohibited. So, hey, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. So, which Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel are we talking about? And the basic idea is: do we say that the end thought of somebody will impact will tell us what their initial thinking was. So Elam Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel de Gittin, maybe it's Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel that we learned in Maseches Gittin de Tanan because we learned in Gittin Daf Samech Vav Amid Aleph. Habari, if you have a healthy person, Sha'amar Kisvu Get Lishto, who says, write a get to my wife, Ratza L'Sachek, but he's only intending to tease her, and so he doesn't really mean anything. Umasa Bivari, there was a person who was healthy, Sha'amar, who said, Kisvu get ishti, write a get for my wife, V'olu lagag v'naf omes. And then he went up to, and then after the get was delivered, he goes up to the roof and he jumps off and he dies. So I'm sorry, and he falls and dies. So Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, meaning if he caused himself to fall, if he committed suicide, hare get, then then it's going to be a valid get because it shows that in the end, although he looked healthy, he was not healthy. V'im haruach dechato eino get. But if the wind pushed him off, then we are going to say it's not a valid get. V'havinan ba, and we asked the question about that. Mazeh listor. One second. It seems like the story is contradicting the ruling because the ruling was that a healthy person is his get is not considered valid, and yet this healthy person, his get was considered valid. So chasuri mechsera v'hachitani. So there are some missing words, and here's what it's trying to say: Im hochiach sofo al tchila. So if it turns out that the end situation shows what the person was thinking at the beginning, well then harezeh get. That is going to be a valid get. Umay sinami. And there was a situation that happened. Bevarisha Amar Kisvu get liishti, where a person said, a healthy person said, write a get for my wife. Va'al agag, and he goes up to the roof, v'nafo mace, and he falls and he dies. And Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, ima atzmo nafal hareze get, ima ruach tachato eino get. So that's the situation. So maybe that's the situation where Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel is showing that we will focus on what ends up happening to tell us what happened at the beginning. And so as a result, why was it that we're going to say that we're not going to say whether it's kosher or not kosher? Is the question is that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel would say, well, look, the end of the idolatrous situation where a person slaughtered an animal and then only later had the idolatrous thought to throw blood or burn its fat. Well, let's say, like Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, that the end shows what the beginning was about. And so really we should attribute the idolatrous thought even to the moment of Shechita. And that is why, and so because of that, we would say that the animal should be prohibited according to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. And so, although this thought did not happen at the time of Shechita, and therefore, according to other opinions, it should be permitted, we're going to say, according to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, we're going to be respectful to him, and we're not going to say that it is permitted, and we won't even say, and we can't say that it's prohibited because we don't want to, don't want to disagree with everybody else, but we're going to be respectful and not say either opinion. And so, could that be the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel that is going to allow us to reach this conclusion? Not
But isn't that the
necessarily.
same result with Rabbi Shimon Gamliel? The result is the same. He fell off the roof. Well, he fell, right?
Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel focuses only if the person jumped off the roof. If the person just fell
No,
off the roof,
but it says "Huma atzmo nafal" in both
yes,
cases.
he fell off him by himself. He fell off as a result of his own actions, meaning that he committed suicide.
Right. So, but the end result is the same.
The fact that the person jumped off and that fell
Well,
off
no,
of
but
him.
the end result that in some man he fell onto the ground, and he died. The end result is the same. Whether he chose to
Yes,
do it,
but it's a completely different situation. That's exactly what Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel is teaching. That the end result is not what matters. What matters is what the person's intention was. If the person's intention was to commit suicide, well, then that will tell us that when he was telling somebody to write a get for his wife, he really meant it because he really wasn't well and he didn't want his wife to be he wanted his wife not to have to go through Yibum because they didn't have any children. And so as a result, he gave his wife a get, knowing that he was going to commit suicide. That's the understanding of this, according to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. That's the situation. So Vadilma Shiny Hasam de Ka'amar Kisfu. Maybe we can say that the fact that he said to write a get, that also is some evidence also about what happened later. But here, in the connection with the Shechita, there is no sign whatsoever about any idolatry until after the Shechita. The Shechita is a normal behavior, whereas telling somebody to write a get for your wife is not a normal behavior. So Ella Amar Ravina. So as a result, this ruling of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel is not the one that's relevant. Rather, Ravina says Mishum Kvoda de Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel dahacha. It's out of the respect from this ruling. That Tanya, we have a brisa. Akosim nechasav la'acherim. If you write your possessions over to other people, v'hayu bahen avodim, and there were slaves among them, v'amar hala efshi bahen, and the person who's supposed to receive it says, "Listen, I don't want these slaves." Im haya rabo sheni kohen, if the owner, if the person who was supposed to get these slaves was a kohen, hare elu ochlim b'truma, they are still allowed to eat truma. Ramashim ben Gamliel Omer kevan she'amar hala efshi bahen kvar zachu bahen yorshin. Once this person has said that once this kohen who's supposed to get the save says, I don't want them, now all of a sudden, instead of going to the recipient of this gift, who's a Kohen, it will go to his children, and therefore it's as if the children already have it, and there because this person is on his deathbed, and so as a result, he's going to those slaves are not allowed to eat the truma, and that is showing that the words that happen later, because remember, the person gave the gift to this to the kohen before the kohen says, "I don't want it," and so as a result, we're going to say that v'havinanba, and we said l'tanakama, according to the Tanakama, afilo omed vitzovayach, even if the person is protesting, can that be that that even then the slaves are still going to be considered owned by the recipient of the gift, the Kohen? Amar Rabba v'isem Rabbi Yochanan. No, bitzoveach mikara dekuli amalo pligig delo kana. Everybody agrees that if the Kohen was arguing and saying, no, no, don't give me the slaves from the very beginning, that he will not receive them. Bishosek ubisof soveach. No, what we're dealing with is a situation where initially the Kohen who was receiving those slaves did not say anything, and only later did he protest. Dekuli ama lo pligi dekalna kana. And in that situation, no, everybody agrees that even in that situation, it's too late. So ki pligi shazika lo al yedei acher. The situation is where the benefit, where the person who was on their deathbed and giving away the gift, he gave it to somebody else. V'shasak v'sof tzavach, and the beneficiary was silent at the beginning and only protested later. Tanakama savar midishasik kaninhu, that because he was quiet and it was already acquired by somebody else, that's going to be a problem. And now that he's complaining, he's just changing his mind. He doesn't want to be responsible for the slaves. But for Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel savar, no, the end shows what the original intention was. And the fact that he didn't complain at the beginning, savar, he was thinking, kilo asiliyade. It hasn't yet come to my hands. Amai etzvach. Why should I protest? Because it was going to him through a messenger, and the messenger had it. And so as a result, that's why he didn't protest initially. But really, he would have, and he wanted to protest, and he was unhappy about it. And so as a result, that is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel that shows that we focus on a later thought to indicate what somebody thought earlier. And so that is why, out of respect to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, we are going to say that we're not going to say that the animal is we're not going to say that the animal is permitted because Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel would say no. The later thought about idolatry shows that there was initially idolatrous intent even at the time of slaughter, and therefore it should be prohibited. And so as a result, I'm not going to. The rabbis in Caesarea said, you know what, we're not going to say that it's permitted out of respect to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, and of course we don't necessarily agree with Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, so we're not going to say that it is prohibited either.
Was Rabbi Shem Gamliel, didn't he say that we follow the end result? Is that what he said?
Yes, and the end result
Because
is
you
that
don't know there was a shaliach here, right? So this person, he didn't know until he actually got the
no,
slaves.
no, he knows that there's a shliach. No, he knows that there's a shliach. Again, decedent is giving a gift to David Cohen. David Cohen, but it's being sent through Shlomo.
Right.
David Cohen knows that Shlomo's bringing it, and David Cohen doesn't say anything until Shlomo gets to him, and so as a result, now he complains. And so Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, listen, I understand why he didn't complain before. Shlomo hadn't gotten to him. And so as a result, really, David Cohen did not want these slaves ever even at the beginning, and therefore those slaves really belong to the decedent's heirs, and so that's who gets it. Whereas the Tanakhama says no. The Tanakhama says no. If he didn't want it, he needed to complain as soon as Shlomo was receiving it. That's when he needed to complain, and he didn't complain then, and it's too late to complain now. And so the bottom line is that the rabbis in Caesarea, where a person, what is the analogy? The analogy is to a person who did the slaughter, and then only after the slaughter says, now I'm thinking about it. I want to give the blood onto this idolatrous altar, or I want to burn the fat on this idolatrous altar, and so that's my plan. And now and so the question is, what do we say about the meat? Do we say that the meat is not kosher because if the person had that thought while doing the slaughter, it's not kosher, and we can focus on what happened later and it will inform what really happened earlier, and we'll say, like Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, that just like the person who was giving the gift, receiving the gift, really was rejecting that gift from the very beginning. Here too, the person was really intending to do the slaughter in order to do the idol worship of the blood or the fat, or burning the fat, and so as a result, the animal's not going to be kosher. Or do we say, not like Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel? And so the rabbis in Caesarea, out of respect to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, did not want to rule that it was permitted because Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel would have prohibited, and they didn't want to rule that it was prohibited because of the rabbis who say that it would have been permitted. And so that's the situation, and that's the analogy. Let's finish up to the Mishnah. So Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, halacha Rabbi Yossi. The halacha is like Rabbi Yossi, namely that the owner's intent has no effect. Hanu taye de asul tzikunya. So these Arab merchants were coming to Tzikunya. Yav dichre l'tabche Yisrael, and they gave some rams to a Jewish butcher. Amralahu, they said to him, Dama desarba l'didan, we'll take the blood and the fats. Mashka obisra didchu, you take the hide and the flesh. And why do they want the blood and the fats? Because they are going to do idolatry with them. So Shlacha Rav Tuvi bar Rav Masna lekamei de Rav Yosef. So Rav Tuvi asks Rav Yosef, Ki hai gavna mai? What's the halacha? So Shalach lei, Rav Yosef sent back, Hachi Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, halacha Rav Yossi. The halacha is like Rav Yossi. We don't care about the owner's intent, and even though these Arab merchants are going to do idolatry with them, you can do it, and you can keep the hide and the flesh as your payment. Amar le Rav Acha Brei de Rav Avya le Rav Ashi le Rabbi Eliezer Yahiv le Zuzel le Tabad Yisrael Mai. So, if according to Rabbi Eliezer, now remember, Rabbi Eliezer is the one who says that thinking whatever the owner thinks does make a difference, and so now an idolater gives a zuz to a Jewish butcher in order to buy a piece of an animal. So before the animal is slaughtered. So is that going to now create a problem and make the entire animal non-kosher, and therefore the butcher has to make sure not to ever accept such a zuz? So Amrle Chazinan inish almahu. If the idolater is a powerful person, so delo matzi madche an elam. This is a elam. Sometimes elam can refer to two different things. One is a person who has no ability to talk, a mute person, but this is alma as in a strong. So this is a strong man, situation. So if the person is the non-Jew is a strong man, where the butcher has no opportunity to push back, delo matzi madchele, and he can't refuse. Well, now it's as if this non-Jew truly owns a part of the animal, and so as a result, his thought, according to Rabbi Eliezer, is enough to make the animal prohibited. Asur, the animal would be forbidden according to Rabbi Eliezer. So Amarle, the elo, but if he doesn't have that power, well then Amarle Reishech Lahar, look at bang your head against the mountain, meaning I don't need to. I can give you back your money and not give you a part of the animal. And so, as a result, because the Jew has effectively the ability to retract his deal, even if he got the money before he did the shechita, and therefore, according to Rabbi Eliezer, if in fact the non-Jew owned a piece of the animal and really owned a piece of the animal, he would potentially make the whole animal prohibited. But here, because he doesn't really own the animal, because the Jew has the ability to give back the money and keep all of the animal, we're going to say that it's a situation where the Jew does where the non-Jew has no ownership interest, and therefore the thoughts of that non-Jew will not adversely affect the kashrus of the animal. Okay, and
Did he buy it? Did he pay? He paid him.
So again, non-Jew, we'll call him Chris. Chris gives the Jewish butcher a zuz for a small piece of meat in this animal that has not yet been slaughtered. So if Chris is a powerful guy, so the butcher has no ability to retract the deal, well, now Chris has bought a piece of the animal. Rabbi Eliezer says we worry about the non-Jew's thought and assume that it's for idolatry. And therefore, now this entire animal is effectively for idolatry, and no Jew's allowed to benefit from this animal at all. That would be the halacha according to Rabbi Eliezer if this is a powerful person. If,
What
however, this
happens
person,
then? That he
what?
gives him the non-Jew gives him money. So
Yeah,
what does he do? But he can't refuse it because this person violent, powerful, whatever. What is he going to do with the money then? He keeps the money or?
Yeah, well, I think it's a good question. Is that I think he can keep the money. I think he can keep the zuz. The poor thing is that the zuz wasn't worth the animal. The animal was worth a lot more. But now he's stuck with this animal. He needs to try and get out of this situation so that the non-Jew does not own the animal. If the non-Jew is just a powerful person and says, I want to buy meat from you after you slaughter the animal, that's not going to be a problem because then the shechita is totally valid because the non-Jew doesn't own any of the animal. And similarly, in the case where the non-Jew is not powerful, again, call the guy Chris. Chris now gives the zuz to the butcher. Now, although Chris has already given the zuz to a butcher and therefore effectively owns part of this live animal that is about to be slaughtered, because the butcher has the ability to say, listen, go bang your head against the wall. I'm not really giving you don't really own part of the living animal. I'm giving you back your money. If he had that ability so that really there was no ownership interest in this animal at the time it was slaughtered by Chris really didn't have an ownership interest in the animal. Well, then the butcher doesn't need to worry about Chris's ownership interest, and the whole animal will be kosher. Because again, we if Chris doesn't own a piece of the animal, his thoughts about idolatry certainly cannot have any kind of impact,
Right.
even according to Rabbi Eliezer.
So he tells him, "Go home. I'm not going to sell you the animal. I'm not going to sell
Exactly.
you
Or
anything."
I'll sell it to you after the animal is dead. Right? The butcher can sell the animal after the animal is dead. He can sell it, and the non-Jew can do whatever he wants with it. But the problem is that if he owns a piece of the animal while the animal is live and is thinking about doing idolatry, well, now all of a sudden the entire live animal becomes prohibited. That's the problem. That's the concern in the situation in this last case that we're dealing with. And so again, as long as the animal is, as long as the Chris is not a powerful person, so then we're not going to worry about it because effectively the Jew could have told Chris to go take a long hike off a short pier, as they say. So
But in a
long walk
powerful
on a short
person,
pier.
if this is a powerful person,
Well,
and he
then
says
by
it,
having received
how
the,
can he return the money to him? Then
it's
he will
too
be
late.
offended. This person will be offended.
Correct, exactly. So the point is as soon as the powerful person gives money, money is kona for non-Jews, and so as a result, the non-Jew has an interest in this animal, and as a result, when the Jew now slaughters it, does not make a difference. According to Rabbi Eliezer, again, the other opinions in the Mishnah disagree with him, but according to Rabbi Eliezer, this animal is now prohibited. You cannot do anything with it. You may not benefit from it at all. It is considered as if it was a idolatrous animal.
So what is the non-Jew? He says, "I paid you. I want my animal."
Yeah, he'll not only does he get the piece that he paid for, but effectively he gets the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that isn't the Jew then benefiting from it? What does he do with the money? Throw it out?
No. He are the steps are you can't have an idolatrous thought. The idolatrous thought while the animal is alive is nothing. So when the Chris gives the dollar to the butcher, he owns now $1 worth of the meat of this animal. And he can think that I want to use that for idolatry or whatever, but as long as no service is done with the animal, that thought has no meaning. The time that it matters is when he's doing the slaughtering. Now that the kosher slaughterer is doing the shechita, now all of a sudden the animal becomes a animal of idolatry because that's when you had the thought that mattered.
Right.
That's when the non-Jew owner, again, according to Rabbi Eliezer, the owner's thinking matters. And so even though he only owns $1 of the animal, now the entire animal is considered for idolatry. And so the Jew can keep the dollar. It's just the whole animal is now can't benefit. He can't sell the rest of the animal. That would be benefiting from idolatry. But the original dollar is totally fine.
Oh, because he got it before the animal was shechted.
Exactly. That's the story. That's the situation. If he gets the dollar only after the animal is shechted, well, then he's also going to be fine. The Jew is going to be fine with respect to the entire animal in that situation, because once the animal is slaughtered, the non-Jew buying an interest in the animal is going to have no effect on other than on the piece that he bought.
So when is it affect? When is the problem with the idolatry? Only while the Jew is actually in the act of shechting the animal?
When the Jew is in the act of doing the shechita, if the non-Jew is thinking that I want to use my piece of this animal for idolatry, now all of a sudden this becomes the whole animal becomes a fully idolatrous animal, according to Rebbe Eliezer.
So if the non-Jew gives him the money beforehand, it's not a problem. If he gives him the money
No,
afterhand,
no,
it's
no,
not a
no,
problem.
no. Wait. It, the question is what you're asking about. Are you asking about the $1 that was given? If the $1 was given beforehand, you're right. The $1 is fine. Bob the butcher can keep the $1. The problem is that the rest of the animal is not valid, and so this $1,000 animal is now worth zero, and he can't sell
Oh,
it. He can't do anything for it if he gets the dollar before he does the shechita.
but why can't he give the whole animal to this non-Jew?
Because then he'd be benefiting from idolatry because he'd be giving
Right,
a gift
exactly.
of
That's
the
my point. He's benefiting from the idolatry then. So he can give him what? Only the section that's worth the $1.
Yeah,
He
that's
can't give him
what the
anything.
guy bought. That's what the guy bought.
So that's not considered an idolatrous piece of the animal.
Well, it is an idolatrous piece of the animal, but the person bought it already, so it's already he bought it before it became idolatrous.
Oh, so he's already bought it, that
Yeah,
section
so
of the
he already
animal.
owns it. You can give somebody something that they already own.
Oh,
That's
so
not benefiting from it. But
however,
he
the
can't.
rest of the animal
The rest
becomes
of the
that,
animal needs to get burned. There's nothing that he could do with it.
and the non-Jew couldn't say, "Listen, you're not going to use it. You can't touch it. I'm going to take the whole animal." And he steals it.
Well, it's a powerful person. Maybe he can, we're dealing with a powerful person. Maybe he could say that, he can do that, but that's not on the Jew any longer, right? The point is the Jew
Right.
can't voluntarily give it to him as a gift because then he's going to have some benefit. Even if you give something as a gift, you're benefiting from the ability to give it as a gift.
What do you benefit?
The benefit is
The good
the
relations.
good
The good
relations. Exactly.
relations.
Correct, correct. That's exactly right. That's what we say. All right. Have a fabulous day. Looking forward to continuing our learning tomorrow. We'll pick up again with the Mishnah on the bottom of Lamed Tet Amud Bet.